What's up, guys? It's me, Coach Mills, and today we're going to be breaking down a new patch DPS tier list because the patch definitely changed some really important things that has a cascade effect over the rest of the meta. So we're going to talk about the best and worst DPS to climb with and play with in the current meta. But do me a huge solid and smash the like and subscribe. Check me out on stream live Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and for private coaching, links will be in the description down below. Now, let's start things off, and first, let's talk about Tracer. And Tracer's definitely a really interesting character because I think that Tracer is one of the hardest potential carry characters in the game without a pocket. But when you add pocket into the mix, there's some characters that could get more value. However, Tracer's really good at pressuring Mercy, very good with dive characters that are more opened up now as we got to see Roadhog kind of fall down the wayside, and it all comes together to make Tracer that S tier pick. Now, the thing that's important to understand about Tracer is that Tracer is not easy at all to play. And for the vast majority of people, Tracer won't feel like an S tier DPS. There's a lot of characters that can threaten you. Kiriko, one headshot can kill you out of nowhere. Ana can two-shot you from range. And a ton of different characters can press you out of nowhere. However, if you set up in a very aggressive position and you wait for your team to engage, there will be key moments where the opponent's distracted, they've already used cooldowns, and there'll be windows of opportunity where you can use the pressure that your team created to go and punish Mercies, Anas, Kirikos, DPS, and the list goes on and on. Tracer's really good at shutting down a lot of these top characters, and definitely one of the best DPS to carry with if you get good at Tracer and put in the effort. So anyways, let's move on to Symmetra. Symmetra's an interesting character because if your opponent is actively brawling and your team is brawling, like if both players are brawling, both teams are brawling, Symmetra could be really good. And right now we're seeing a lot of mirroring Ramatras where Symmetra can actually be not bad, actually pretty good. However, Symmetra kind of falls apart when there's a lot of dive going on and when Winston is being played and some of these other characters are being played. I think that there are key weaknesses to her kit, but in a lot of the status quo games where you're seeing a lot of Orisa and Ramatra, I think that she could be a really great pick. And in addition to that, she's also really good on some Koth maps where you can teleport straight to point through windows and things like that. And she's also a really great pick the lower in rank you are, because Blizzard has stated that she has a very high win rate in the lower ranks. So we're going to put Symmetra actually in the B tier. Next up, we got to talk about Hanzo, a character that has actually secretly been rising up the ranks, mainly because Hanzo is actually good at dealing with a lot of pockets and good at dealing with some amount of divers. So let's talk about some of the characters that Hanzo actually has good matchups against. You can shut down pocketed Ashes, you can shut down pocketed Sojourns, and you can contest Widowmakers, and you're pretty good against Junkrats fighting them from range, and you're actually pretty good against Tracers if you're good at Hanzo. There's a lot of matchups that you can actually win and be good at Hanzo. I think it's a little bit less consistent than another pocketed long-range DPS. That's one of the biggest problems. And the other key factor to do with Hanzo is he's not the best at being pocketed compared to them as well. So I think if you don't have a pocket, like all of a sudden, like in a mercy-free world or a world where your teammates don't play Mercy, Hanzo can actually be pretty comparable to characters like Ashe and Sojourn. But when you have that pocketed introduced, then the gap between Sojourn and Ashe becomes far wider. And I think that you have to be a lot more skillful on Hanzo than you have to be on those other characters to make them work. Still, I think Hanzo's a great pick in some situations, so I'm going to put him at the top of B tier. The next character that I got to talk about is Cassidy. Cassidy's another character that's a little bit strange to place because I think he's good against a multitude of different types of characters. Like, if you can set up close range brawl engagements, he's pretty good against like most of the cast as long as he keeps a decent distance from them and he can utilize taking aggressive off angles with his nade. Now, there are a lot of weaknesses to Cass as well. Like, he gets heavily outranged by so many different characters. So when you compare him head to head against characters like Ashe and Widow and things like that and Sojourn, he's just not that good in direct comparison. But he's better at pressuring out the enemy supports when they go in close range. He's better at punishing aggressive plays by the enemy. So if someone goes for like an aggressive Junkrat play or something like that, he's really good at shutting that down. And he's also pretty good at pressuring out tanks as well with a lot of burst damage. I think that he's not a great pocketed target, and there are definitely matchups where he suffers in, but for the multitude, for a lot of the ranks that you would play Cassidy in, I think he's pretty good. I'm actually going to put him, it's weird because I don't know whether or not, I think I put him a little bit above Hanzo, but it's kind of close. I think equal skill level, Cassidy gets the advantage, but when you get to the highest skill level, I think Hanzo gets the leg up. So it's going to kind of depend here. Next up, let's talk about Torb. Torb's a character that is priced to get even better going away from the old meta with Roadhog, and it mainly just comes down to the fact that when you're playing against a lot of these characters that one tap, you can either challenge it with other one taps, you know, if they're pocketing long distance, you can challenge that, or you could play characters that spam a lot of damage into space and you do a lot of spatial control, and that's a character like Junkrat and a character like Torb. It's spatial control, and Torb is one of the best at doing it. He's great at shutting down characters like Tracer, he's great at shutting down dives, and he doesn't necessarily take direct fights with a lot of these long distance hit scans, and still gets a ton of value. So I think that Torb actually is like an A tier character. Very, very powerful, very strong, gets a definite bump up because the lower in rank you go, the stronger and stronger this character gets. So yeah, definitely putting him in the A tier. Now we gotta talk about Ashe. Ashe is definitely insane. One of the best characters to pocket, period. If Sojourn didn't exist, it would probably be like an Ashe meta, maybe a Widowmaker meta, but probably like an Ashe meta. I think Ashe is phenomenal. Very, very strong. One of the best DPS that you could be playing right now. Is good with and without a pocket. And I think is when you like take away pockets entirely, I think Ashe is like very comparable to Sojourn. With the pocket, I think maybe Sojourn gets a little bit of a leg up, but still, Ashe is so good, so strong. I'm actually putting Ashe at the top of A tier. Just at the cusp of S tier, but still phenomenal. Now we got to talk about Echo. Echo's another character that kind of gets slept on in my personal opinion. But unfortunately for Echo, Echo is kind of fighting one for the pocketed spot, right? There's a lot of other characters that you might rather pocket. So like playing a ground Echo is not as strong as a flying Echo with the Mercy pocket. And two, Sojourn, Ashe, Cass, and Tracer actually are all hard matchups for Echo. Like especially Tracer is really annoying because it feels like you can't do anything about her on Echo. But if you're ever caught slacking, the Tracer could swoop in and finish you off. So that's a little bit frustrating, but I think a really good Echo could still make it work. But I'm actually gonna put Echo like towards the top of A. I think very, very powerful ultimate, team fight winning ultimate, insane ultimate, and still a good pocket to target, especially on some maps. I think you can get Echo to work, but when faced directly against the meta and the average amount of skill for what is being played in the meta, I think Echo suffers a lot. Still better than these characters that I think have strictly better characters that you can play because she fights on a fundamentally different axis, but not as strong as some of these other characters. Let's talk about Mei. Mei is kind of rough. Mei's not that good. Mei's really weak in my personal opinion. I think that Mei unfortunately suffers from just the switch to Overwatch 2. We talked about this in the previous tier list. Not very good at wall. Like wall doesn't get a lot of value. You can't really slow people anymore, so you're pretty bad at dueling. Your long range damage isn't as good as many of these other characters, and your ultimate's not that good compared to a lot of other characters as well. I actually want to put Mei like in the C or D tier. Unfortunately, I think Mei needs a little bit to make her better. And I would say because we're in a brawl meta and there's like characters like Ramatra that maybe you can like stop their ult with a wall, I'm going to up it a little bit to C, but for the most part, this character is not that great. Next up is Pharah. And Pharah, I think on the right maps, Pharah could be a menace. But the problem with Pharah is that it's pretty map dependent, and I think that on some maps, you know, Circuit Royale, Junkertown, the list kind of goes on and on where Pharah just doesn't really work. Like there's a lot of maps where Pharah just doesn't really work all that well unless your name is Yesnia. And even then, it's easier to get the value just pocketing like an Ashe or a, you know, a Sojourn or something like that. So for those reasons, I'm putting Pharah down here. I think Pharah can still be really, really great on some maps, but you just can't play her everywhere. Very, very map dependent. Of course, if we're talking about like console or some of the lower ranks, Pharah Mercy could be higher up the list. With general metas always working with Pharah Mercy, I think Pharah Mercy is better, but with this meta in particular where other pocketed DPS makes sense, it just doesn't make as much sense to invest all that into a Pharah. Now we got to talk about Widowmaker, and this is where the controversy starts, and this is where it kind of gets kind of hard to place Widow, because if we're talking about GM+, Widowmaker is undoubtedly S, probably like top of the meta. Widowmaker is insane because switching to 5v5, getting one taps is so powerful. You can take really far off angles and no one can invest resources to chase after you or shut you down. You can pressure mercies. You can one tap, even pocket a DPS. You can just dominate games. For the average skill in the game, like even if we're talking about like Masters or Diamond or any of these other ranks, Widowmaker is not going to be an S tier character because it's directly tied to like your mechanical skill, right? And for console, unless you're using a Zim, probably not high up on this list, unfortunately. But if we're talking about the top-down meta, then Widowmaker would definitely deserve this up here, somewhere in S tier. I think that for like an average, I think that you can have terrible mechanics on Widow and still make her like a top of B DPS. That's how powerful this character is. You can miss a lot of your shots, but just distance yourself very, very far away. Make sure that you're taking these angles where you can't be pressured out very easily because you're really utilizing your distance, and you can get so much value because you get a ton of shots before you have to run away. Save your grapple, run away when you need to, reposition, and then you can just win fights. And you don't even have to hit a lot of your shots. But if you start hitting your shots like crazy, all of a sudden you're a god. I'm gonna put her up into S tier, but like realize it's between S and B depending on the rank you're in. But I think that's still bad mechanics, still top of B, which is pretty phenomenal for the character. Let's talk about Junkrat. Junkrat's a character that I think has gotten a little bit weaker as we moved away from the old meta. I think he was actually better in a world where your tank is like gonna one-shot you. However, in the attrition brawls, he's still phenomenal. Like Orisa versus Ramattra, Ramattra v Ramattra, Orisa v Orisa, still freaking phenomenal, but there's a lot more variation in the tanks that are being played right now. We're seeing some amount of Doom. We're seeing a lot more Sigma. We're seeing some amount of Zarya and Diva, and all these tanks are a lot better at dealing with a Junkrat than, you know, than some of the other tanks that were played in the previous meta. So I think that Junkrat is being kept more in check, but as long as we maintain a one-shot meta or a pocketed DPS meta, Junkrat will still be really good. And yeah, I'm gonna put Junkrat in the A tier. I think actually, let's put him like right here. I think that this is probably fair for Junkrat. Still very strong, a little bit weaker than he was before, but still great. Okay, let's talk about Sombra. I think, unfortunately, Sombra is my first D tier character. Now, don't get me wrong. If you're getting dominated by one of two characters, I think you can whip out Sombra. A Widow, that is insane. You can make the Widow not play the game. A Wrecking Ball, that is insane. You can probably make him swap just by auto-piloting these characters. But outside of those situations, most of the time, Sombra is going to be so much worse than a Tracer, so much worse than a ton of DPS. I mean, just a very, very weak character where the EMP is not guaranteed to win a fight. The coordination required to get this character to work, oftentimes, you're not going to find in ranked. And even Sombra mains right now are kind of struggling to climb. And even like top level Sombras are struggling to climb. I think this is one of the weakest states we've ever seen Sombra before. Even when Sombra was weak in the past, the ultimate was so insane that oftentimes you could just force through teamfight wins with ult. And counter hacking people and keeping them hacked for a while was just a really powerful bit of utility. But now we're in a situation where Sombra is just like far too weak. I think that Sombra is our first D tier character. Maybe a little controversial, but yeah, it is what it is. Now let's talk about Sojourn. Sojourn is in D tier. Now, the reason that Sojourn... Okay, I'm just trolling. Top of S. Come on. Top of S. Sojourn is still nuts. Just ridiculous. Unfortunately, even with the damage boost changes and the nerf to Sojourn is still an S tier DPS. However, this is the caveat here. It's the same caveat that we fall in with Widowmaker. Your average player will not be able to reach the heights needed to make Sojourn like the best of the meta. For the average player, an Ashe would probably be better, or maybe even no pocket at all. And that's a good thing, because that means that for the meta of most people, Sojourn isn't going to be like the Titan that you have to run into and the raid boss that is going to ruin your games. But if we look at a meta from the top down, right? And typically that's how you look at a meta, is from what the best of the best are playing or what the high ranks are playing. And we look at that, Sojourn is still being played in a ton of games and is the best DPS, Tracer, and Widow. Now, all three of these characters are high skill characters, so there's going to be a lot of variance the lower in rank you go, which means that there's going to be a lot of flexibility, which is good. That means that the DPS role right now isn't as hard locked as it could be. I think that specifically when we move over to like the tanks, right, or like in the last meta where it was like Roadhog and Orisa, these characters were easy enough to play for the vast majority of people that the high ranks played them, the low ranks played them, the mid ranks played them, everyone played them, or everyone should play them. But with DPS in particular, because the disparity between skill and meta is so polarizing, you can kind of get away with anything, which I think is a good thing. It's something that like most people outside of people in GM are gonna be happy with. Anyways, tangent aside, let's move over to Reaper. I think that some people are sleeping on Reaper. I think Reaper's actually really good. I think that Reaper actually could be one of the best characters in B tier. And this is probably a very controversial pick. Some people are saying that Reaper's bad, and some people don't agree with this. But I think that Reaper in particular is a character that if you can utilize his teleport, set up your engagements properly, not only can you heavily pressure supports and other DPS, but you can do things like burst through a pocket, you can create a lot of fight momentum, and you can actually punish tanks, especially tanks that want to brawl. And yeah, I think all those combined make Reaper like a serious threat, and you can't really get away with just being like a lazy Reaper or a Reaper that just walks at tanks. You have to be very specific with your engagements. You have to aggressively teleport to high grounds to try to find these key opportunities. But if you do those things, Reaper can completely hard carry fights. So this is probably like my one against the grain controversial pick, putting Reaper up so high. But I believe that Reaper deserves this. I think Reaper is really, really strong. Soldier 76. Actually, let's move this far up to the top of C. I'm going to move these around a little bit because I do think that Soldier is pretty strong. I think that Soldier is actually at the bottom of A. Another semi-controversial pick. I think that what Soldier provides that some of these other DPS don't is that Soldier can operate really well on an aggressive off angle without a pocket. Where a lot of these, like even Sojourn would really like a pocket, Ashe would really like a pocket, and like these characters don't really want to take an aggressive off angle because they could be pressed out and killed very easily, but Soldier can. So Soldier has the flexibility to like take an aggressive off angle in a brawl composition and go try to get a pick off like a 1v1 with a DPS or pick off a support, or you could play an aggressive off angle in a dive composition with a Wrecking Ball or a Winston or whatever and contribute to the dive. So there's a lot of flexibility involved, and I think that the self-sufficient nature of Soldier makes Soldier good. Plus, Soldier is really, really great in ranks where you just can't really rely on your team all that much. So yeah, I'm putting Soldier up towards the bottom of A tier. I think pretty good, and a great character to just have in your repertoire just to whip out in certain situations. Genji, my boy Genji. I'm actually putting Genji in the C tier. Unfortunately for Genji. Crazy how Hanzo doesn't even get an ability passive, but somehow Genji's worse. And the reason is like Genji just has bad matchups against so many things right now because of his damage numbers. He has a really hard time even dueling someone like an Ana, has a hard time making proactive plays with Suzu. A lot of the pocketed DPS, you just can't touch unless you play against them mechanically perfect. Like so mechanically perfect that if you're that good mechanically, play another character and you'll probably climb harder on that character. Nanoblade can still be a really powerful tool, but like outside of that, Genji is just pretty poor, pretty weak, definitely needs nerfs. No, I'm just kidding. Definitely needs buffs. And yeah, I think that Genji is just one of the weakest DPS in the game right now, unfortunately. However, the one saving grace of this character is he has decent matchups against, you know, like Widowmaker, decent matchups against Hanzo, decent matchups against Cass. You can get him to work if your teammate is playing full dive. Like you can get him to work in a full dive. But yeah, for the most part, not really that great, unfortunately. Sorry, Genji mates. Last but certainly not least, we have Bastion. And yeah, Bastion's actually a little bit slept on, I would say. Still not great. Still pretty bad. Still easy to counter. All those things, but a little bit slept on. I think in the past, I really have hated on Bastion a ton. But I'm actually going to put Bastion in the C tier. That's a lot higher than maybe he deserves. But I'm putting him in here anyways because I think that Bastion can punish heavily teams that don't respect a Bastion. And as long as you're disciplined in your turret use, you stay in your normal use trying to look for key cooldowns that can shut you down. Sleep, nade, Suzu. I mean, not really Suzu, but you know, like key cooldowns that can really shut you down. And you're like, okay, they use these cooldowns. I'm going to pop in turret. I'm going to apply a ton of pressure. Great. If your team works with you, even better. But the majority of the time, Bastion is not going to be that great of a pick because he can just be shut down very easily, unfortunately. Anyways, I think that this kind of summarizes where I think the meta is at right now. And I think that, of course, depending on the rank you're in, there's a lot more flexibility in what you can play. Of course, any of these characters can get you to GM and beyond. So just because it's on the tier list doesn't mean you can't play it. So don't be like, oh, don't play that character because it's not X tier or whatever the case may be, because that's just not true. You could play any character and still climb, but this gives you like a little overarching view of the meta. And of course, we're going to be doing the support and tank tier list soon, so make sure you smash that like and subscribe. Thank you so much for coming by. Hope you enjoyed the content, and I'll see you next time.